came into hunting and guns from a completely non-gun background. My dad did a little bit of hunting when I was a kid, but he never really introduced me to it, and guns were not a big part of my life. I sort of thought that guns were scary and bad until I got interested in finding out how to get my own food, and that played a big role in learning about firearms. When I first started researching what kind of guns I would need in order to hunt effectively, I didn't even know the difference between a rifle and a shotgun. In case you're wondering, the difference between a rifle and a shotgun is that, generally speaking, rifles have what's called rifling in the barrel, which are grooves that help the projectile move in a more precise fashion, while shotguns generally have a smooth bore. But there are a lot of differences. Mainly, we're going to focus on shotguns today and talk about different types of shotguns, different gauges, actions, and some safety concerns that you need to think about. So before we get started, I want to assure you that I have no ammunition in this area. This is my gun cleaning area, and for safety purposes, we make sure that we keep all ammunition in other areas in order so that we don't have any kind of accidents that happen. We also have safe directions because it's in the basement. So the walls here are cinder, and I'm unlikely to do damage to anyone else while I'm in this area. So I'll safety check all of the guns as we go through for demonstrations, but first I'm going to use some screen sharing and the hunter education tools to show some of the gauges and action types for shotguns. So we'll look at those. Let's give me 1 second. First, I want to look at different shotgun action types here. I'll show you which ones those are. This is a pump action, a break action, and a semi-automatic. These are the common types of shotguns that you'll find. And we can look at the way that these function and operate. So we'll look at, first we're going to turn the safety off, or the safety on, and then we're going to load the ammunition right into the magazine. And then we're going to put one in the chamber. So here, this shotgun shell is going into the chamber, and I'll show you this on the actual shotguns here, but without ammunition. So then we're going to take the safety off, and this is how a pump action will fire. So you fire the 1 round. In order to remove that spent shell, we have to move the forearm back and then place another round into the chamber. The difference between that and a semi-automatic is that in a semi-automatic, that's going to happen for us automatically. So we'll put the safety on, we'll load our ammunition. We're going to use this handle here, the charging handle or the operating handle, to chamber around. And then we're going to pull the safety off and fire this, and it's going to automatically load the next round for us. That's why it's called semi-automatic. Okay, we're going to go back and look at the break action. Break actions come in a couple of different types, so you can see these side by side. A single shot, that's the gun that I'll have to show you today, and the over-under. So let's see, we'll look at this one. So this is going to show us the top view and the side view, and this one has a safety, some of them do not. We're going to engage the safety, and then it's currently on the under barrel, so we're going to have to switch the indicator to give us the over barrel. And then we're going to open it, break it open, and we'll load the ammunition in. Click it closed. Engage the safety. And it first fires the top barrel and then the bottom barrel. Okay, so we'll go back here. And those are the types, the various different types of actions. Next, I want to look at gauges. There was a question that came up about the difference between gauges. The nomenclature on round, caliber, and gauge was very confusing to me when I first began. But generally speaking with shotguns, the gauge refers to the number of lead balls that would equal a pound at that size. So you can see here 12 gauge is 12 lead balls, 16 gauge, same thing. Of course, there's always some outlier there. So 410 is not actually determined that way. It's determined based on the diameter of the barrel measurement. And it's one of those things that people act like you should just be born knowing this information, but it is difficult for newcomers to sort of get into the information. But it starts the smallest number, usually the 10 gauge is the largest gauge, and as the numbers go up, the size of the barrel goes down. So you choose your action type, you're going to choose what gauge shotgun you want. Once you've determined that, then you have some flexibility in how that shoots with chokes. So chokes refer to how that barrel size is tapered down and how the shot behaves when you're shooting. So here are the examples for lead shot. It's just sort of a quick animation of where the tightness at the end of the barrel is going to determine, or the choke is going to determine how that shot patterns at range. So at 25 yards, this is sort of an approximation. Different shot size and different shot is going to behave differently in different guns, but this is just sort of a basic representation of that. It is recommended that you do not use a full choke for steel shot because of the way that steel shot behaves, but these are the various different chokes. And I have chokes to show you also, so we'll just sort of do this as an overview. And then shot size. So once you've made the decision about the gauge, you're going to decide which kind of shot you want. And there are various different size BBs, which will lead to different amounts inside the shot. So here, if we're using number 5 shot, for example, you're going to have about 170 BBs per ounce. And then steel obviously is a different, because it's a different weight, is going to have a different number of BBs per shell. Something that we'll talk about a little bit is patterning, but I don't know how far we'll get into that once we start taking guns apart. And patterning will show you how the gun behaves. And this is sort of an example of that at different distances with different shot. So we could choose what distance and what shot we have. So for example, we have a 12 gauge here at full choke with steel shot size number 4. And if you take it to the range and you shoot it at 40 yards, 25 yards, 10 yards, then you're going to have a various different patterns. So here you have it very spread out at 40 yards, it's a little bit tighter here, and maybe even too tight up close. So that's the kind of thing that you would want to do with your own gun and your own ammo in order to figure out what kind of shot you need. So come back to video. So I have a couple of guns here, and I'm going to start with the gun that was my first shotgun. This is a 12 gauge pump action Ithaca shotgun. And I chose it because I'd done a lot of reading, and somewhere I read that this gun shot really well for women. It's a feather light, and the way that a shotgun fits your body is really important. So if you can get your hands on a lot of different types of guns and try them at the range, that's ideal. The shape of the stock here, so this is the stock. The shape of the stock is going to determine how it sits against your shoulder and your cheek, which is going to determine how you see the bead, and so how effective you are at shooting that shotgun. So before we get far with this gun, first I'm going to show you that the magazine is empty, and I'm putting my finger inside the chamber. The chamber is also empty, so we're good and safety checked there. So I guess we'll talk about, so this is a pump action. So like in the animation, you're going to load into the magazine, and then you would rack around into the chamber, and then you're loaded. Anytime that you shoot and you need to load a new round, there's a little button here in front of the trigger guard that's going to release the forearm, and then you would be able to pull, that will eject the shell from the shot that you just fired, and then you can chamber a new round into the chamber. Right now, I have this gun out turkey hunting, So right now I have my full turkey choke in there, and you can kind of see, let's see if I can get a good angle on it, that it extends past the end of the barrel. And that's because when you're hunting turkey, usually you want your pattern to be quite tight. And so it's taking all of those BBs and tightening them down as they come out of the barrel. So we looked at turkey chokes starting with full, I'm sorry, at shotgun chokes starting at full and then going down modified, improved cylinder, and even skeet, which is an even wider choke. But this is the turkey choke, which is significantly tighter than, see if we can get these all out in order for you, the full. So here's the turkey and the full next to each other. So this one is going to make it tighter, and then this is going to be open a little bit more. And then who's this? This is our improved cylinder. So I want to show you the modified next. So then this is the modified. So we'll look at that next to the full. The full is tighter, and then the modified. And then here you have the improved. That's going to be even more wide open. Then I think in order to take most chokes out, you're going to need a wrench. And so this is the choke wrench that came with my shotgun. The turkey choke is easy to get out because it sticks out past the barrel. However, if you have one of these chokes in there, it's going to be flush with the barrel and rather difficult, and you can't get a hold of it to get it out of the shotgun. So look at this guy down in there. When you're placing it in the gun, when you're going to be shooting, you want to make sure that you do get the wrench and you just finger tighten it. You don't want to sort of over crank it. But then the wrench has various different gauge sizes on it. So it has 12, 16, 20, and 28. So you just use the side of the wrench that's appropriate for the gauge shotgun that you're using, and you sort of slide it into those notches and then loosen it. You also don't really want to do what I just did, which is put in a choke with no lube. A lot of times chokes or shotguns will even come with some, but you need to use a choke lube of some kind. There's various different brands just to make sure that it doesn't get stuck in there. And we did talk a little bit about lead and steel. If you're going to be using steel shot or non-lead ammunition, which I recommend that you do, you want to make sure that the chokes that you're purchasing are produced with that in mind, that they're able to handle that. Some chokes are not able to handle that. Okay, so I think we're going to, since we've got this gun up here on the bench, we'll go ahead and take it apart. And I only really take it apart enough to clean it. So this one's pretty easy. Up here by the magazine, you have this bolt here that tightens down in order to keep the barrel on tight, and you loosen it. It has a little locking mechanism, which is maybe a little bit hard to see, that you just rotate the barrel once it's loosened. It's not loosened all the way. There we go. Of course, this would happen right now. Come on. Well, maybe it's because I have this. There we go. So you want to keep the action, the fore end slightly down. When it's all the way up, it's a little too tight in there. So this is the barrel we've taken off, and it has little grooves here that keep it connected. So it doesn't really screw in, but it rotates in. And in order to clean it, this is the main part that I'm cleaning. This is getting very dirty. In fact, yeah, it is very dirty right now. I don't know if I can get that. It's disgusting. I did shoot and did not clean it right away when I got home, which is what you really should do. And then the inside the action here believe you can also see that a little bit. It's also dirty. And so I clean in here, but I don't go through the entire process of taking apart the action because it's not recommended in my instruction manual. So when you get a gun, you're going to get an instruction manual and you want to check that. It's possible to take it down. I've looked at YouTube videos about taking it down further, but if I had a real problem, I might get into that, but I might consult a gunsmith also because it's not recommended in my instruction manual. In order to get into the magazine, we can keep removing this, loosening this, and the spring is here. And this is the spring that's feeding those rounds back down to the chamber when you use the pump. And then here is my plug. So in order to hunt waterfowl, you can only have 3 rounds in your shotgun. It's federally mandated. So most shotguns are going to come with a plug. You can use a wooden dowel rod. Sometimes with the Mossbergs, I think the one that comes in is just a wooden dowel, but this one has a plastic plug and it prevents you from loading more than 3 rounds. If you wanted to hunt with more than 3 rounds in the gun, you could take the plug out. I never do. I do sometimes take it out to make sure that this magazine is clean. It doesn't get terribly dirty in there. There aren't a lot of issues with gases and things like that because it's not a semi-automatic. Okay. Get that back in there. And, well, I guess since I've got this all out, we'll do a little bit of cleaning. I really prefer to use what's called a bore snake. So it's this guy, which has a very fluffy end, and then it has little wire brushes up here, and this string is for feeding it through the barrel with a little weight. And on the weight, it tells you which gauge to use, which gauge it's appropriate for. So we have a 12 and a 20. I want to make sure that if I'm cleaning a 20 gauge shotgun, I'm not using a 12 gauge cleaning snake because it will get stuck inside of the barrel and it won't be pretty. In order to use one of these, you want to look at your instruction manual that comes with your gun in case there's a specific cleaner or lubricant that they want you to use. I think that my shotgun just said to use any kind of CLP. CLP is cleaner, lubricant, and protectant. So it's like an all-in-one product. You can use products that are like the Hoppe's has like a solvent and a lubricant that you can use, and you do the solvent first and the lubricant second. I find that my life is a lot easier if I just use the CLP. So you're going to be putting that onto the bore snake, the cleaning snake. This guy's got like a little applicator. It's kind of nice. I put a little bit on the wire brushes and on the end of this fluffy part here. On there, and a little bit on there. And you want to clean if you can. Sometimes it's difficult to get into a gun, to get the barrel completely off and get into it. But if you can, you want to go from the chamber end toward the muzzle, which is the end that the ammo is coming out of, in order to keep all of the dirt that's gone through there moving in the same direction. So I'm feeding it through the barrel and it drops out the end because it's got the little weight on it. And then you grab a hold of it and pull through. The wire brushes are going to go through first and they're going to break off all of the gunk. And then the fluffy part is going to come through and help push all that stuff through. And they're fit very tight and for good reason because you're hopefully getting it really good and clean. If you want to, this has a little opening. You can put a little piece of fabric or cotton paper in there. We have these little patches that we use for various different guns. And then you can run it through until it comes out clean. I prefer a reusable product, so where did I hang them? I have these squeegees. So once I've done this a couple times, I will often transition to this guy. These are the Remington squeegee cleaners. I just love them. Once I found out about these, I had to get them for every caliber that I have. So it's like little rubber discs, and that'll hold your cleaner and push it through the barrel. And it is a nice tight fit. And ideally, you want to try and do this until it's not coming out with any gunk. Of course, I've got the wrong I've got the wrong pull size. So this is a cleaning rod, and they're made out of brass, which is a softer metal than the metal of your gun barrel, so it won't damage your gun barrel. And they rotate independently of the handle. These usually come in kits at gun stores. A lot of times they come with the Hoppies products, but I don't seem to have the right one right here in front of me. So the idea is that you are going to thread it onto your cleaning rod and then force it through the barrel of the gun, and it comes out dirty and disgusting, and you wipe it off with your rags that you want to have handy and take it off and then start the process again. And once it's coming out without black gunk on it, then you're good to go, you're clean, and you can put the gun away. I also like to protect the stock of the gun. So we have this silicone impregnated cloth. I'm not really sure even what this is, but it's a little bit oily and it's a little bit protectant. So you can rub it on the wood of the stock and it kind of will fill in the little cracks and help protect the gun from any dirt. It also helps clean it up a little bit. And then we got to put it back together. So we've got the barrel, which just will, so you can, let me see if I can show this here. You have these threads in here, and there are threads on one side and not on the other side. And you're going to match it up with the threads here to the side. And then turn it. And it just sort of nestles right into place, and then you tighten this down all the way. You're good to go. All right, so that was the 12 gauge pump action. I'm actually going to put a choke back in because I definitely do not want to shoot a shotgun without a choke in, unless it is a fixed barrel that doesn't take any chokes. Usually are the 410 shotguns, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, we'll set this guy down. Next, we'll look at the break action. So this one is not my personal shotgun. This is my husband's shotgun. He's really into fancy old-timey stuff. And this is a Henry, and that's a fancy old-timey company, I guess. Anyway, I think it's great, but I like efficient tools, and so for me, a single shot break action doesn't feel efficient. But I can understand why some people might enjoy them. They're very simple. There is like almost no moving parts on this guy. You've got your trigger, and you've got your hammer, and you've got the selector to open the barrel. So in order to safety check it, you just push it to the side, and the barrel pops open, and we can see there's nothing in there. And you don't even take this off. So in order to clean it, you just clean it. You're good to go. You can load it there, you clean it there, and that's all she wrote. Close it. In order to fire it though, you do have to do the hammer. So you have to cock the hammer, and then then it's ready to fire. And there's no safety on this gun. I'm not loving that. And so in order to, if you decide you're not going to fire, but you've already got the hammer cocked, then you have to put your thumb over the hammer and squeeze the trigger and then slowly ride the hammer forward. But it's very simple. So the appeal here is that it is a simple machine with very few things that can go wrong. It's easy to operate, but for me, it's inefficient and to me, a little bit less safe. Oh, the second shotgun that I got was this 20 gauge, and this is a semi-automatic. So, and it's sort of like the extra fancy gun. It has this kickoff plate here that has like a super spring in it that reduces recoil. It's 20 gauge, so it's a lower recoil than the 12 gauge that I showed you before. Before we get too far, let's see if you check it. So here, there's nothing in the chamber. And there's nothing in the magazine. I can push on the bottom of the magazine spring and feel that, so we can see that that's clear. And this is a beautiful gun, so it's a little bit it's a little bit over fancy, but it's very efficient. So it has, like when I showed in the animation, you are going to load into the magazine, which I think we're going to have to close the action in order to do that. So there's a button here that closes the action and the charging handle that opens it. And then there's a way to lock it back open. So lock back, and then we can close the action that way also. So let's lock it back open. So you can load here and lock it open. And the safety is here in front of the trigger guard. There's the trigger. And in order to clean it, I'm going to have to take the sling off. It's a little bit in the way. Let's turn it over this way. So in order to case, the case that came with this one has it taken apart, and it's very easy to take apart. It's got nice big fat threads on it. And so you unthread it just like we did with the 12 gauge. And that, guys, comes off completely. And then the fore end has a cover on it that slides off. And then we can see this is the gas chamber. So when a semi-automatic fires, this might be getting a little nitty gritty, but when the semi-automatic fires, the gases that are released that would normally just come out the action or out the barrel are sort of used to rechamber the gun, so to chamber the next round. So they come back through this mechanism and they push the round out and they push the next round back so that it can be forced into the chamber. And that's kind of the way that functions. And this barrel, once we've got it taken apart, we'll just slide out. Slide it forward. And we have the barrel separate. And now to clean this one, we would clean through the barrel here like we did with the 12 gauge, but we're also going to want to clean this gasket where the gases go. So it comes out. You want to be very careful. It's got little adjuster in there that keeps the airflow moving, and all of that needs to stay in the same direction. So you don't want to lose any of the pieces, and you want to make sure that they all stay in the same order that they are. And then you can clean this out. You can clean this guy, this gasket, and then slide it back in there, just like that. And then while you've got it apart, it's sort of easier to get into the action here and here to clean this all out. Again, you can take it down further. And Beretta actually does have the recommended steps to take on their website and in their instruction manual, but I find it to be quite tedious. There are pins, and yeah, I mean, I do it every once in a great while, but not very often, and really would prefer not to. The risk of losing a part or misplacing a part feels a little high. Get into that. We just slide the barrel back in, and cover back on, and thread this guy right back on there. We're good to go. So that's the semi-automatic, and it's a 20 gauge. And our last guy is a 410. 410s are sweet because they, generally speaking, have very little recoil. But if you do your research, you can often find rounds now that are so excellent for everything, even turkey hunting. My husband's been taking his 410 turkey hunting the last couple of years and just loves it. So they're really worth looking into, especially for new hunters. I went with the 12 gauge when I got my first shotgun because I wanted something that was completely universal that I could use for almost any game. But with the recent innovations with ammunition, I feel like a 410, maybe not any game, but it could take a lot of game, and so it's worth doing your research. And it's a really small gun, it's a light gun, and it doesn't have a lot of recoil. So this is also a pump action. So we've already seen this action type. And we'll check magazine empty. See if I can feel it in the chamber. Chamber empty. We can visually inspect that the chamber is also empty. And this has the safety up here also on the tang. So my safety on my guns is down here by the trigger guard, and I'm right-handed. So most safeties that are right by the trigger guard are much easier to operate for right-handed people. For people who are left-handed, there often aren't guns that are set up for them. Usually they have something that's more ambidextrous, like this. So this is a Mossberg, and it has the safety right on the top of the what's called the tang. And my husband tends to gravitate toward those because he's a left-handed shooter. And this one's going to come apart almost the same as the other pump action that we did. This one also has a sling on it, so I have to get that out of the way first. Come on. There we go. Okay. So this guy has the little threaded knob right here. We'll just loosen it. And I think we actually have to take him completely out. There we go. And then the barrel will just slide forward, come right out. And his is dirty too. Oh, look at that. I'm not the only one who's not cleaning my guns. So this guy would need to be cleaned also. And we also have smaller bore snakes. We have a 20 gauge and a 410 that we can use to do the same process through, running it through until it gets nice and clean. With this guy, it has a fixed choke, so there's no changing chokes. This is a full choke. And he also has another barrel that has a cylinder choke. I'm actually wondering, no, this is the full choke. And that can be used then for other game, like small game and things like that. That is that. One thing to consider when looking at guns, so a 410 being small and light is not a big deal because it doesn't have very much recoil. We bought a 20 gauge that was very small and light. It was marketed as a kid's gun. It was a much older model, but the gun was so lightweight that the recoil was unbearable even for my husband. And he's a little recoil sensitive, but don't tell him I said that. And it was difficult for even me to shoot, and I don't mind shooting a 12 gauge with a 3-inch turkey load in it. So it's important to consider the weight of the gun when you're thinking about recoil. So those are the guns that I have, and we've looked at the chokes. I feel like I had a question about gauge that I think that we covered some of that, but I'm not sure. When you're choosing the gauge of a shotgun, you're usually, generally speaking, considering two things. You're considering the game that you want to be able to take with that gun and your ability to shoot it effectively. So if it's a high caliber gun, it may have a significant recoil. And if that's something that is offensive to you that you don't think you could get into, then it may be difficult to get enough practice and to get comfortable shooting that gun. But I find that a lot of times management of recoil has to do with how you handle the gun. So in fact, my husband and I were just talking about this. You want to make sure that when you shoulder a shotgun, that you're pulling it into this pocket in between your chest and your shoulder. There's like a little pocket where your body sort of naturally folds, and you want to make sure that you get that stock in there and that you're pulling back on it so that you can feel the pressure pushing into your body. And then when you put your cheek down on the gun, you want to make sure that you're getting it really nice and tight and that you're pushing into the stock of the gun so that your contact with that stock is solid. Because when the gun goes off, it's going to push. And if you're connected to the gun, then you and the gun both move backward with that recoil. If you are just loosely holding on to the gun, then it's going to basically punch you in the shoulder or in the cheek. And that's usually where people get into trouble and start to feel pain and get recoil sensitive. So I think that has some of the gauge stuff covered with that. In terms of getting comfortable with guns, which I think was another one of the questions that someone had asked, you want to maybe find a place where you can shoot guns, like a club, a sportsman's club, or an event that's being held where you can shoot maybe a couple of different guns and try them out. If you know someone with different types of shotguns, it's nice to be able to try with them. If you don't have those options, some ranges will have guns that you can rent in order to use, and that can help you get comfortable with guns. When I started, I took my hunter safety class at a sportsman's club, and that club ran like a weekly shoot. And so I just started going to that weekly shoot and started to meet people and try out getting comfortable with guns. The thing that can be a barrier is that a lot of times the people running those events can have their own ideas already about what you're bringing to the table, especially if you're a woman and you're brand new to guns. So it's important to take some of the things that they say with a grain of salt. When I went to buy my 12 gauge shotgun, the guy at Cabela's could not believe it and really wanted me to buy a 20 gauge. And I'm really happy that I had done my own research ahead of time and knew that that was what I wanted. And so I didn't let what he had to say affect me too much. But it is something that, in order to get comfortable, really just exposure over and over again, and familiarity with safety rules can really make a big difference. I don't know if there's other questions that anyone has, or if there are things that I didn't cover that anybody would like to hear about, but I think that's most what I had. Yeah?
So Jen, one of the other questions that was submitted during registration was, what shotgun do you own and why did you select it?
Okay. So my shotguns, I have the 12 gauge Ithaca pump action, which I got mainly because I felt like it was a gun that was large enough to take any of the game I was interested in taking. And I wanted to start with squirrel, but I didn't want to rule out the possibility of big game like deer. So I wanted something that could do that range, and a 12 gauge can do that. And I had done a little bit of reading, and I had read that the Ithaca Featherlight was a gun that fit well for women. I got my second shotgun, the Beretta 20 gauge semi-automatic, in part because it's beautiful. It was an anniversary gift, and I think that having a semi-automatic is nice, especially for like waterfowl, where you're potentially shooting rapidly at multiple birds coming in. But it doesn't fit me quite as well, so it's taken a little bit of finesse to get totally comfortable with it. So I see a question here in the chat box. What is the biggest barrier you have faced in your journey into hunting and shooting? When I first started out, the biggest barrier was not even knowing how to formulate questions. I tried to Google things like, what gun do I need to hunt squirrel? And that apparently, without understanding the difference between a rifle and a shotgun, and understanding the different reasons why you might want a rifle versus a shotgun for something like squirrel, it was very difficult to get into that. Hunter safety class helped a lot, but I had the fortunate opportunity to take hunter safety with all women at a women's event. So there was a lot of camaraderie and people I could ask questions of that made it feel a lot more comfortable. But I don't come from hunting culture, and so there was a disconnect, like an in-group language, out-group language disconnect that was happening, where I didn't really even know how to ask the right questions, and that really felt like a big barrier. But there was also fear about the safety, and once I understood safety protocols and could see them being followed, that barrier went away pretty quickly. But it was definitely a big deal for me at the beginning, because the fear just sort of kept me standing back. But once I understood the safety protocols, then it was just sort of the cultural barrier, which I feel like I might still be struggling with even today, as I'm trying to learn to hunt more species and things like that, and understand what I consider to be the ethics around that versus what's legal and all of that kind of thing. So yeah, that's a good question.
Another question we have is, have you modified any guns to fit you?
So I haven't really. My Beretta has a shim in it that you can take out and flip to different angles in order to make it fit more properly. And I've done that in order to finesse that fit better. I did look into contacting someone to modify my stock, but it felt like a little bit too much to try and do. And ultimately, if I had a real problem, I think I would, but I have not yet.
Can you talk a little bit about when you're purchasing a gun, what you should look for as far as fit goes?
Yeah. So when I was talking about how to hold a shotgun, when you get it nice and tight into the shoulder and a nice tight cheek weld, you're going to be looking down the barrel of the gun. You're going to see the tang where the barrel begins, right at the action, and then you're going to see a bead all the way out at the end of the barrel. And if you can see that bead naturally sitting right in the middle of that tang at the end of the barrel there, when you do that nice tight in the shoulder, tight on the cheek, you just naturally do that. And if you can see that, that's a good fit. Now, you're going to want to test it at the range, pattern your shot, and it's possible that you could find that even doing that and having it look right, that it's still not quite a good fit. But the shape of your chin, your jawbone, the shape of your cheekbone, the length of your neck, and even the meatiness of your shoulder are all, the length of your arm and how naturally that reaches the trigger, all of that's going to play into whether or not that gun fits you right. And different stocks are built slightly differently and can make a big difference. And I feel like especially often for women, we tend to have slightly longer necks and slightly smaller jawbones, which can put our eye too far to one side when we try to cheek that gun. So hopefully that's helpful. Okay, so I see a question here about gauges and pellets. And I'm not sure if, I'm trying to think about where to begin with this. So with gauges, you have the smaller the number of the gauge, so like a 10 gauge being, I think, the largest, is going to be the largest opening of the barrel. So you're going to have the most pellets inside of each shot shell, but that's dependent on size. So if you had a slug, for example, a 10 gauge slug, that's going to be huge compared to a 410 slug, which is going to be the smallest. And as the numbers go up, so 10, 12, 16, 20, 28, you're going to be getting a smaller and smaller slug. And that slug, the number refers to how many lead balls that size would fit in 1 pound. So 10 lead balls the size of a 10 gauge make 1 pound. 12 lead balls the size of a 12 gauge would make 1 pound, which is just where the number comes from. But the shot shells are sized for each gauge, and then within the shot shell you have choices that you can make. So if you have a 12 gauge, for example, and you go to the store and you're trying to find the right ammunition that you want, you can choose the size of the pellets, so the size of the BBs, and the weight of the shell and the length of the shell. So there are a lot of variables involved, which is why it can get really confusing. So if you have like a 12 gauge that's a 3-inch shell, assuming that the gun that you have can handle a 3-inch shell, then you're going to have, say you choose number 6, you're going to have a certain number of BBs that can fit in that shell. And then the rest of that's going to be powder and a wad that keeps those pellets together as they come through the barrel of the gun. The size of those BBs has a lot to do with either how many you want to have or what size you need to take the game that you're after. So let's say geese, for example, are a large waterfowl bird. You might want to choose a shot size that's larger, even though you have fewer pellets in the shell, because you're going to need that larger size in order to take down a goose. But if you're hunting red squirrels, you can use tiny little BBs, and you might be able to get a bigger spread. So if they're running across a log, you have this bigger cloud of tiny BBs, and your chances of getting that squirrel go up. But there's some play in there. There's no hard and fast rules. There are suggestions, guidance about what size BBs are ideal and what gauge size is appropriate, but it ultimately becomes a personal decision. You kind of got to do your research about it. Once you've narrowed it down, like for my turkey gun, I have a 12 gauge and I use 3-inch shells. And once I've narrowed it down to a shot size and a couple of different brands, I buy a box of each. And then I go to the patterning board and take notes and shoot at turkey targets. And then I can sort of see how many of these pellets are hitting a vital area at various different distances. And then I choose whichever ammo I want to purchase in order to go hunting based on what gives me the ideal pattern. I don't know, I'm hoping that that makes sense. I realize I'm using a lot of language that I've sort of acquired over the last 10 years of getting into hunting. So I hope that that's helpful. Please feel free to ask a follow-up question if that was too much. The application that I was using earlier, the hunter education tools, it can be downloaded online for free. It's like a Flash application. So it's called Hunter Education Tools. And I think if you Google HE tools, it'll come up. And it has a lot of interactive animations for the various different gauges and various different shot type. And so you can kind of play around with like a virtual patterning. It obviously won't, simulate exactly what's going to happen with your own shotgun, but it'll start to give you an idea of what that looks like. I wonder if I can get a link for that.
Okay, well, it doesn't look like we have any other questions.
Okay.
Jen, that was amazing. I learned a lot.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, no, seriously, I did.
It was fun.
Great. If you're watching and you think you have follow-up questions after the video, then don't hesitate to reach out to us and we will get back to you with those answers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Have a good night, everybody.